My brother Mark and his wife Josephine evicted me at 2 a.m. immediately after the funeral, claiming the dilapidated factory was my only inheritance. They smirked as I left. But when I unlocked the sealed room inside, I discovered a fortune that would leave them begging for forgiveness. Before we continue today's story, we have an urgent announcement to make. Due to technical issues, we are pivoting towards another channel. Please subscribe to our new channel, Kin and Karma. You can find the link in the video description, the pinned comment, and the collaboration tag on this video. Make sure to switch over now so you don't miss out. Thank you for your support. Now back to the story. The rain wasn't just falling, it was assaulting the earth, hammering against the windows of the house I had grown up in. But the storm outside was nothing compared to the icy silence inside the living room. My mother's funeral had ended only 6 hours ago. The scent of lilies and stale coffee still hung heavy in the air, a cloying reminder of the grief that was currently hollowing me out from the inside. I was sitting on the edge of the beige sofa, clutching a tissue that had long since disintegrated into white lint in my damp palm. My eyes were swollen, my throat raw from days of crying and nights of whispered goodbyes to the woman who had been my entire world. I hadn't slept in 36 hours. I was physically ill, a migraine pulsing behind my left eye like a warning beacon. Mark, my older brother, stood by the fireplace. He wasn't crying, he wasn't even looking at me. He was scrolling through his phone, the blue light illuminating a face that looked remarkably like Dad's but harder. Sharper. Beside him stood Josephine, his wife of 3 years. She was examining her fingernails, looking bored, as if this were a dentist appointment running late rather than the day we buried her mother-in-law. "So?" Mark said, finally pocketing his phone. He didn't turn to face me. He just stared at the empty grate of the fireplace. "We need to talk about the living arrangements." I blinked, my brain moving through sludge. "Living arrangements? Mark, Mom we just buried her. Can't we do this tomorrow or next week?" "No," Josephine cut in. Her voice was sharp, like breaking glass. She turned to me, her eyes devoid of any warmth. "We can't do this tomorrow. We need to settle this now. Mark and I have been talking." "Talking," I echoed. "When?" "While you were busy playing nursemaid," Mark said, finally turning. His expression wasn't sad, it was annoyed. "Look, Kennedy, let's not make this harder than it has to be. You know the situation. Mom and Dad didn't have much liquid cash left after the treatments. The house is the main asset." "I know that," I whispered. "I was the one paying the utility bills for the last 6 months, Mark. I know exactly what's left." "Right," he nodded, seizing on that. "And since you don't have a steady income." "I have a job," I interrupted, a spark of indignation flaring in my chest. "I'm an archivist. I restore antiques. Just because I took a leave of absence to care for Mom doesn't mean I'm unemployed." "It's a hobby, Kennedy," Josephine sneered. "Playing with old dusty junk is a hobby. Mark is in real estate. I'm a designer. We have careers, we have a future." "The point is," Mark spoke over her, stepping closer. He reached into his pocket. "The house is going to us. It's only logical. We can maintain it. We can increase its value. You need to move on." "Move on?" I stood up, my legs trembling. "This is my home, Mark. I've lived here my whole life. I took care of them here. Where am I supposed to go?" Mark pulled a keyring out of his pocket. It wasn't the house keys. It was a heavy, rusted iron ring with 3 large, jagged keys dangling from it. They looked medieval, coated in a layer of grime that stained his thumb. He tossed them at me. I fumbled, barely catching them before they hit my chest. The cold metal bit into my palm. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the rusty object. "The old factory," Mark said, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Down by the river. Dad bought it 20 years ago thinking he was going to start that manufacturing business. It's been rotting ever since. That's your share, Kennedy. The land, the building, whatever is inside, it's all yours." I stared at him, horror dawning on me. "The factory, Mark, that place is condemned. The roof is caved in. It's a ruin." "It's an asset," he shrugged. "Sell the scrap metal, sell the bricks, I don't care. But as for this house..." He looked around the living room, possessiveness radiating off him. This is ours now." "You can't be serious," I choked out. "The will, the lawyer." "We are the executors," Josephine said, stepping up beside him and crossing her arms. "And we've decided on the distribution of assets. You get the commercial property, we get the residential. It's an even split on paper." "It's not an even split," I screamed, the grief finally giving way to rage. "You're giving me a pile of rubble and keeping $1 million home." "Stop being dramatic," Mark snapped. "You're lucky we're giving you anything. Honestly, after living here rent-free for years while we paid our own mortgage." I was taking care of dying parents. I yelled, tears streaming down my face. "I was wiping faces and changing sheets while you were on vacation in Cabo." Mark flinched, but Josephine didn't blink. She checked her watch. "You're upsetting me," she said calmly. "And I don't want negative energy in my new master bedroom. You have 5 minutes to pack, Kennedy." "What?" I gasped. "It's 2 a.m, it's pouring rain." "5 minutes," Mark said, his voice cold and final. "Or I call the police and have you removed for trespassing. The deed transfer is already in motion. This isn't your house anymore." I looked at my brother, the boy I had played catch with, the man I had hugged at our father's funeral just 2 years prior. He was gone, replaced by this stranger with dollar signs in his eyes and a cruel woman whispering in his ear. The betrayal hit me harder than the diagnosis itself. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. Something in Mark's eyes told me that begging would only give them satisfaction, and I had just enough pride left to deny them that. I ran up the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I grabbed 2 duffel bags from my closet and began shoving things in indiscriminately. Clothes, my laptop, the small wooden box with my jewelry, a framed photo of Mom and Dad from their 40th anniversary. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely work the zippers. 5 minutes. I could hear them downstairs, murmuring. I heard Josephine laugh, a light, tinkling sound that made my stomach churn. They were probably already discussing paint colors. They were erasing me before I was even gone. I didn't take everything. I couldn't. I left my books, my furniture, the life I had built in that room for 26 years. I threw on a heavy coat, grabbed the bags, and marched back down the stairs. Mark was waiting by the door, holding it open. The rain lashed against the porch, a gray curtain of misery. "Good luck with the factory," he said as I stepped past him. "Maybe you can find some rats to train." "You're making a mistake, Mark," I said, my voice surprisingly steady given the storm raging inside me. "Mom and Dad would never have wanted this." "Mom and Dad are dead," he said flatly, "and they left me in charge." He slammed the door in my face. The sound echoed like a gunshot. I stood on the porch for a moment, the freezing rain instantly soaking my hair. I heard the lock click. Then the deadbolt. Then the chain. I dragged my bags to my car, a 10-year-old sedan that had seen better days. I threw them in the back seat and climbed into the driver's side, shivering uncontrollably. I started the engine and cranked the heat, but the cold had settled deep in my bones. Where could I go? I checked my phone. 2:15 a.m. I couldn't go to a hotel. I had emptied my savings account to pay for Mom's hospice care because Mark had claimed his assets were tied up. I had exactly $40 in my wallet and half a tank of gas. I thought about calling Allison. She was my best friend, the sister I never had. But she lived an hour away, and she had an early shift at the hospital tomorrow. I couldn't wake her up with this. Not yet. My eyes fell on the passenger seat. The rusty keys Mark had thrown at me were sitting there, staining the upholstery. The factory. It was about 5 miles away in the old industrial district that had been abandoned since the 90s. It was a terrible idea. It was dangerous. But it was a roof. And technically, according to my brother, it was mine. I put the car in gear and drove. The roads were empty, the streetlights reflecting on the wet asphalt like streaks of blood. I felt a strange numbness taking over, a survival instinct kicking in. When I arrived at the factory gates, my headlights cut through the gloom to reveal a scene from a horror movie. The chain-link fence was torn open. The main building was a hulking shadow of brick and broken glass. Weeds grew waist-high through the cracks in the concrete. I drove through the gap in the fence and parked near the main entrance. I grabbed a flashlight from my glove box and the rusty keys. Stepping out of the car, I was immediately soaked again. I ran to the heavy metal doors. They were welded shut with rust. Panic flared in my chest. If I couldn't get in, I was sleeping in my car. I moved around the side of the building, checking the smaller doors. Locked, boarded up. Then, I remembered something. A memory from when I was 6 years old. Dad had brought me here once. He had told me, "Kennedy, the front door is for show. The real work happens around the back." I stumbled through the mud to the rear of the building. There, hidden behind a tangle of overgrown ivy, was a smaller steel door. It looked solid, impenetrable. I held up the keyring. One of the keys was smaller, with a strange, triangular head. I cleared the ivy away and found the keyhole. I inserted the key. It wouldn't turn. "Please," I whispered, tears mixing with the rain on my face. "Please." I used both hands, twisting with all my strength. With a loud crack that sounded like a bone breaking, the mechanism gave way. I pushed the door open and stumbled inside, the smell of oil, dust, and old metal hitting me instantly. I was in. I swept my flashlight around. It was a loading bay, empty except for some rotting pallets and piles of debris. The roof leaked in several places, water dripping rhythmically onto the concrete. I found a dry corner in an office room that still had a door. I curled up on the floor, using my coat as a blanket. It was the lowest point of my life. Evicted, orphaned, and sleeping on the floor of a ruin. But as I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind kept drifting back to Mark's smirk. "This is all Mom and Dad left you." He thought he had won. He thought he had discarded me like trash. But he had forgotten one crucial thing. Dad didn't buy junk. Dad was a man who saw value where no one else did. And Mark, for all his real estate licenses and expensive suits, never understood our father. He never understood that the most valuable things are often the ones hidden in plain sight. The sun didn't so much rise as it did bleed gray light through the grime-coated windows. I woke up stiff, cold, and for a split second I forgot where I was. Then the smell of mildew hit me and the reality crashed back down. I sat up, brushing dust off my coat. My phone buzzed. I pulled it out. A text from Mark. "Don't bother coming back for the rest of your stuff. Josephine called a junk hauler. They're clearing the room out by noon. Moving on is best for everyone." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to tell him he was a monster, but I knew it wouldn't matter. To Mark, emotions were inefficiencies. I didn't reply. Instead, I stood up and really looked at my inheritance. In the daylight, the factory was even worse. The main floor was a cavernous wasteland. Graffiti covered the walls. There was evidence of squatters, old fires, beer cans, but they looked years old. It seemed the place had been empty for a long time. I walked through the space, my archivist brain kicking in automatically. I was looking for structure, for history. Dad had bought this place 20 years ago. Why? He was a mechanic by trade, a genius with engines, but he had retired early due to his heart condition. Why buy a massive, crumbling factory? I reached the far end of the main hall. There was a ramp leading down to a basement level. It was pitch black down there. I turned my flashlight back on and descended. The air grew cooler, drier. The smell changed. The mildew faded, replaced by the scent of grease, high-octane fuel, rubber. At the bottom of the ramp, I hit a wall. Literally. A massive, floor-to-ceiling steel partition blocked the entire basement. It wasn't part of the original building. The welding was clean, modern. It looked like a bank vault door had been installed in the middle of this ruin. In the center of the door was a heavy lock mechanism and a keypad. I frowned. Mark hadn't given me a code. He had just given me keys. I looked at the keyring again, the third key. It was thick, silver, and looked more like a safe deposit box key than a door key. I tried the key in the lock. It fit perfectly. I turned it. Click. A green light flickered on the keypad, but the door didn't open. The keypad required a code. I leaned my forehead against the cold steel. A code? Of course. Dad loved puzzles. "Think Kennedy," I muttered. "Think." Dad used the same numbers for everything. His anniversary. No, too obvious. My birthday. Mark's birthday. No, I remembered the last time I saw him lucid before the morphine took over. He had grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. "Kennedy," he had rasped. "The project, it's finished. 1969, don't forget." I had thought he was hallucinating about his high school graduation year. I typed in 1969. Nothing. Wait, the project, Dad's favorite car. The one he always talked about but claimed he could never afford. The 1969 Shelby GT 500. I tried the engine displacement. 428. The light turned red. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes and pictured Dad. I pictured him in our garage, wiping grease off his hands. What was the one date that mattered to him more than anything? The day he opened his first shop. May 12, 1980, I typed 051280. Beep, clunk, whir. The heavy steel bolts retracted with a sound that vibrated through the floor. The door groaned, the hydraulic hinges hissing as it swung inward. I stepped inside, aiming my flashlight into the darkness. I fumbled for a light switch on the wall. I found a breaker box and flipped the main switch. Overhead, rows of industrial fluorescent lights flickered, buzzed, and then hummed to life, illuminating the space. My breath caught in my throat. I dropped my flashlight. It clattered loudly on the polished concrete floor, but I didn't hear it. The room wasn't empty. It was a cathedral. The basement was pristine, climate-controlled. The floors were sealed with white epoxy, and arranged in perfect rows were cars, not just cars, legends. There was a 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, painted a deep, glistening cherry red. Next to it, a Jaguar E-Type British Racing Green looking like it had just rolled off the assembly line. A Porsche 356 Speedster, an Aston Martin DB5. There were 12 of them. 12 masterfully restored, vintage automobiles. I walked toward the Corvette, my hand trembling as I reached out to touch the hood. It was flawless. The dust cover had been pulled back. On the windshield was a note in Dad's handwriting. "For my retirement, or for a rainy day." I looked around, stunned. This wasn't a junk pile. This was a collection worth millions, easily. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mark. "By the way, I forgot to mention, there's a demolition notice on the factory. The city wants it torn down in 30 days. You'll be liable for the cost. Good luck." He was trying to bury me. He sent me here to go bankrupt demolishing a ruin. He had no idea what was in the basement. He and Josephine saw a rusty exterior and assumed the inside was the same. They judged the book by its cover, just like they judged me. I looked at the cars. I looked at the tools lining the walls, professional grade, worth thousands on their own. Then I saw a figure in the reflection of the Corvette's window. I jumped, spinning around, but it was just me. A tired, grieving woman in a dirty coat. But as I looked at myself, I realized something. I wasn't just Kennedy the archivist anymore. I wasn't just the little sister. I was the owner of the most valuable secret in the state. I picked up my phone. I didn't reply to Mark. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I needed. Jackson Mechanic. I hit call. "Kennedy." His voice was groggy. "It's 7 a.m., everything okay?" "Jackson," I said, my voice steady, eyes fixed on the gleaming chrome of the Jaguar. "I need you to come to the old mill factory. Bring your truck, and bring your appraisal kit." "Why?" he asked, sounding confused. "What's at the old mill?" "My brother's biggest mistake," I whispered. The moment Jackson walked through the basement door, his jaw literally dropped. He stood there, blinking, his toolbox hanging from his hand like he'd forgotten it was there. Jackson had been Dad's favorite apprentice before Dad got sick, and he knew cars better than anyone I knew. "Kennedy," he whispered, stepping into the climate-controlled sanctuary. Is this real?" "It's real," I said, my voice trembling slightly as I leaned against the fender of the '67 Stingray. "Dad built this, all of it, secretly." Jackson walked slowly down the line of vehicles, reverently touching the polished curves of the Aston Martin, then the Porsche. He whistled low and long. "This isn't just a collection, Ken. This is a museum. These restorations are concourse level. We're talking serious money here. Millions." "Millions?" My heart hammered against my ribs. "Are you sure?" "Positive," he said, turning to look at me with wide eyes. "The market for these specific models is skyrocketing right now." Especially with provenance like this, single owner, meticulous restoration records. Speaking of which, are there records? I pointed to a heavy metal filing cabinet in the corner of the room. I haven't looked yet. We spent the next 4 hours going through everything. Dad hadn't just restored cars, he had documented every bolt, every coat of paint, every hour of labor. There were binders thick with receipts, photos, and certificates of authenticity. He had built a legacy in the dark, preparing for a future he never got to see. But as we sorted through the paperwork, a chilling realization settled over me. Mark didn't know. He couldn't know. If he had even a suspicion of what was down here, he never would have handed me the keys. He saw a rusty, condemned building and assumed it was a liability, a financial noose to hang around my neck. Then I found it. Tucked in the back of the bottom drawer, under a stack of old manuals, was a blue folder labeled Deed and Title. I opened it. Inside wasn't just the deed to the factory. It was a letter from Dad dated 3 years ago. Kennedy, if you are reading this, I am gone. I know Mark. I love him, but I know his ambition blinds him. He sees the world in transactions. You see the soul of things. That is why I am leaving the factory to you. It is not what it seems. Use it well. And remember, the foundation is stronger than the facade. Tears pricked my eyes. He knew. He had planned this. He knew Mark would try to take the house, the obvious wealth, and leave me with the scraps. So he hid the real treasure in the scraps. We need to move these, Jackson said, interrupting my thoughts. His voice was urgent. If Mark finds out. He thinks the place is being demolished in 30 days, I said, a cold resolve settling in my chest. He sent me a text. He's trying to bankrupt me with demolition costs. Then we have 30 days, Jackson said grimly. We need to get these cars out of here, appraised and secured in a private storage facility. I know a guy who runs a high-end vault in the city, silent partner type, but it will cost money to move them. I have no money, I admitted, shame burning my cheeks. Mark froze the joint account I used for Mom's care. Jackson looked at the cars, then back at me. I'll front the cost. We can sell one, maybe the Porsche, quickly to cover expenses and legal fees. The rest, we hold. No, I said, a plan forming in my mind. We don't sell yet. If I sell a car now, the transaction hits public records. Mark has alerts set up on Dad's name, I'm sure of it. We need to be invisible. Then how? I have a different asset, I said, thinking fast. My skill set. I can appraise these myself for insurance purposes, certify them. I just need your help moving them. And I need a lawyer, a shark. I know just the one, Jackson grinned. She owes me a favor. The next 3 weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and covert operations. We moved the cars one by one, using an unmarked enclosed trailer, always at night. Jackson's friend, a tough-as-nails attorney named Sarah, took my case on contingency once she saw the inventory list. She filed immediate injunctions to halt the demolition order Mark had helpfully arranged, citing historical preservation reviews for the factory structure itself. It was a stall tactic, but it worked. Meanwhile, I was living out of the small office in the factory, surviving on ramen and adrenaline. I watched Mark's social media. He and Josephine were already renovating the house. They posted photos of demo day, swinging sledgehammers into the walls of my childhood bedroom. Out with the old, in with the luxe. Josephine captioned one photo. They were erasing us. But they had forgotten one crucial detail. In their haste to kick me out, Mark had signed the transfer deed for the factory over to me immediately. It was legally, irrevocably mine, and everything inside it was mine. I was ready. The first confrontation happened at the reading of the formal will. It was a formality, really, since Mark had already seized the assets, but Sarah insisted we attend. It was held at the family lawyer's office, a stuffy room smelling of mahogany and old money. Mark and Josephine walked in looking like they owned the place. Mark wore a new Italian suit. Josephine was dripping in what looked like new jewelry. They stopped dead when they saw me. I wasn't wearing my dirty coat. I was wearing a sharp black blazer I'd retrieved from storage, my hair pulled back in a severe bun. Next to me sat Sarah, looking like a predator in a pinstripe suit. What is she doing here? Josephine hissed, clutching her designer bag. We already settled this. We're here for the reading, Sarah said smoothly. Please sit. Mark sat down, looking annoyed but confident. Look, Kennedy, if you're here to beg for money for the demolition, the answer is no. You wanted the factory, you got the factory. I don't need money for demolition, Mark, I said calmly. I'm actually here to thank you. Thank me? He laughed, a short barking sound. For what? The pile of rust. For the inheritance, I said, sliding a thick document across the table. And to clarify ownership. Mark picked up the document. It was a certified appraisal summary for the contents of the factory basement. What is this? He squinted at the first page. 1967 Chevrolet Corvette, 1965 Shelby Cobra. What is this nonsense? That, I said, leaning forward, is the inventory of the property you so generously deeded to me. Dad's retirement fund, stored in the sealed basement of the factory. Mark went pale. He flipped through the pages, his eyes widening with every line. Value, estimated at $24 million, $31 million. He choked. This is impossible. Dad didn't have this kind of money. He built them, Mark, I said softly. He restored them, over 20 years, while you were too busy building your empire to visit him. Josephine snatched the paper from his hands. Her eyes scanned the total value at the bottom of the last page. Total estimated value, $14, $5 million. Her face turned a shade of red I'd never seen before. You little thief, she shrieked. You knew you stole these. I didn't steal anything, I said, my voice icy. Mark gave them to me. He handed me the keys. He signed the deed. It's all right here. I tapped the transfer papers on the table. All contents, fixtures, and structures located on the property. It was a mistake, Mark shouted, slamming his hand on the table. I didn't know they were there. It's fraud. You defrauded me. Fraud, Sarah interjected, her voice cutting through the noise like a knife. You were the executor, Mark. It was your legal duty to inventory the estate assets before distribution. You chose not to. You chose to expedite the transfer to remove your sister from the family home. That is negligence, perhaps, but certainly not fraud on her part. The transfer is legal and binding. I'll sue, Josephine yelled, standing up. We'll sue you for every penny. That money belongs to the family, to us. The family? I stood up too, meeting her gaze. You kicked the family out at 2 a.m. in the rain. You told me to rot in that factory. Well, I'm not rotting, Josephine, I'm thriving. Mark was breathing heavily, staring at the appraisal as if it were a bomb. Kennedy, he said, his voice dropping to a desperate wheedle. Come on, we're siblings. We can split this. 50-50, it's only fair. I have debts, Ken, the renovations, the market is soft. Debts? I raised an eyebrow. I thought you were the successful one, the one with the future. I leveraged the house, he admitted, sweat beading on his forehead. To pay for things, Josephine's design business, my new firm, we need the cash flow. That sounds like a you problem, I said, echoing his words from the funeral. I have a factory to manage and cars to sell. You won't see a dime, Josephine spat. We'll tie this up in court for years. Try it, Sarah said, smiling a shark smile. We have the deed, we have the will, and we have the keys. We walked out of the office, leaving them shouting at the lawyer. I felt a surge of triumph, but beneath it, a deep, aching sadness. My brother had just confirmed everything I feared. He didn't care about Dad's legacy. He only cared about the price tag. Mark and Josephine didn't give up. They launched a full-scale legal assault. They filed an emergency injunction claiming I had undue influence over Dad in his final days, implying I had manipulated him into hiding the assets. They froze the potential sale of the cars. They even tried to get a restraining order against me, claiming I had threatened them. It was ugly, but while they were fighting dirty, I was digging deeper. I spent my days at the factory, which I was now legally renovating into a proper restoration workshop, and my nights going through every scrap of paper Dad left behind. I needed more than just the deed. I needed proof of intent. And then I found the ledger. It wasn't in the filing cabinet. It was hidden inside the glove box of the 1969 Shelby GT500, a small, black notebook. I opened it and began to read. It was a diary of sorts. Dad wrote about the cars, yes, but he also wrote about Mark. June 12th. Mark came by today, asked for money again, said his investments were temporary illiquid. I gave him $50,000. He didn't even say thank you, just complained about the taxes. August 4th. Mark asked if I had a will. He seemed angry when I said I wanted to leave the house to Kennedy because she has no one else. He said she wouldn't know what to do with it. He scares me sometimes. His greed is a hunger that cannot be filled. September 1st. I moved the Shelby to the factory tonight. Mark has been asking about the garage. He keeps looking around, calculating. I don't trust him with my life's work. He would sell it all for a quick buck. Kennedy, she understands preservation. I am sealing the room, only she will have the key. I sat in the driver's seat of the Shelby, tears streaming down my face. Dad had seen it all. He had been protecting me and his legacy from Mark for years. I took photos of the pages and sent them to Sarah. Is this enough? I texted. It's dynamite, she replied instantly. This proves testamentary intent. It proves he specifically hid the assets from Mark to give to you. It destroys their undue influence claim. In fact, it paints Mark as a predator. But Mark wasn't done. Desperate, he showed up at the factory one night. I was working late, polishing the chrome on the Aston Martin. The heavy steel doors were open to let in the night air. Kennedy. I spun around. Mark was standing in the doorway. He looked disheveled. His tie was loose, his eyes bloodshot. He smelled of scotch. Get out, Mark, I said, picking up a heavy wrench. You're trespassing. I just want to talk, he slurred, stepping into the light. You're ruining me, you know that. The lawsuit. The banks are calling. Josephine is. She's leaving me, Ken. She says if I don't get the money, she's gone. That sounds like she loves your wallet, not you, I said coldly. Don't you dare, he growled, stepping closer. You stole this from me. You manipulated Dad. You were always the little suck-up, sitting by his bed, poisoning him against me. I was caring for him. I shouted, my voice echoing in the cavernous room. I was feeding him. I was holding his hand while he cried because his son never visited. You weren't there, Mark. You were never there. I was working, he roared, to build a future, and you just get handed a fortune. He lunged for the car. I'm taking what's mine. He grabbed the door handle of the Aston Martin. Don't touch it. I screamed. Jackson stepped out from the shadows of the back office, a tire iron in his hand. He looked terrifying. Step away from the vehicle, Mark, Jackson said, his voice low and dangerous. Mark froze. He looked at Jackson, then at me. He saw the security cameras I had installed in the corners of the room, their red lights blinking. He let go of the car. You'll regret this, he hissed, backing away. I'll burn this place down before I let you keep it. Try it, I said, holding up my phone. I'm streaming this live to the cloud, and to Sarah. Mark looked at the phone, his face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. Then he turned and stumbled out into the night. I was shaking. Jackson put a hand on my shoulder. He's desperate, Jackson said, and desperate men make mistakes. He's going to try something at the gala, I said, a realization hitting me. The annual Heritage Charity Gala was next week. It was the biggest social event of the year in our town. Dad had been a founding member. Mark was the current treasurer. It was where he planned to launch his new real estate firm. He's going to try to publicly discredit me, I said. He's going to claim I stole the inheritance to ruin my reputation before the court case. Then we beat him to it, Jackson said. We don't just win in court, we win in the court of public opinion. How? I looked at the line of gleaming cars. We make an entrance, I said, and we bring the truth with us. The annual Heritage Charity Gala was held at the historic Governor's Mansion, a sprawling estate that oozed old money and polite conversation. It was the kind of event Mark lived for, where a firm handshake and the right last name could secure a six-figure investment. I knew he was planning to use tonight to cement his status as the aggrieved heir, and secure backing for his failing firm, painting me as the manipulative sister who stole his birthright. He had no idea I was coming. I arrived late, just as the speeches were beginning, but I didn't arrive in my beat-up sedan. I pulled up to the valet stand in the 1967 Chevrolet Corvette Stingray, its cherry red paint gleaming under the portico lights like liquid rubies. The engine purred with a deep, throaty rumble that turned every head in the courtyard. Behind me, Jackson drove the Aston Martin DB5, looking every bit like James Bond in a tuxedo. Behind him, Allison drove the Porsche 356 Speedster. We formed a convoy of automotive perfection. The valet's eyes widened. "Miss, is that?" "Keep it close," I said, handing him the keys and a $100 bill. "I won't be staying long." I walked into the ballroom, wearing a vintage emerald silk gown I had restored myself. Heads turned. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "Is that Kennedy, the sister? Look at that dress, look at those cars outside." Mark was on stage at the podium, a microphone in his hand. He was mid-sentence talking about family legacy and the importance of community support during trying times. Josephine stood beside him, looking tense in a silver dress that cost more than my car. When they saw me walk in, Mark faltered. He stopped speaking. The room went silent. "Kennedy," he said into the microphone, his voice amplifying the shock. "What are you doing here?" "I'm here to support the Heritage Foundation, Mark," I said, my voice carrying clearly without a mic. "Just like Dad would have wanted." "Security," Josephine hissed, stepping forward. "She wasn't invited. She's trespassing." Actually, a deep voice boomed from the side of the room. It was Mr. Henderson, the Foundation's president and Dad's oldest friend. "She is a platinum donor. The check cleared this morning." A murmur of shock went through the crowd. Platinum meant a donation of $50,000. Mark turned a sickly shade of gray. "Platinum? With what money? You stole that from the estate." "Stole?" I walked toward the stage, my heels clicking on the marble floor. "That's a strong word, Mark. Especially coming from the executor who tossed me the keys to a pile of rust and kicked me out at 2 a.m. The crowd gasped. Mark's meticulously crafted image of the grieving, burdened brother was cracking. It was a misunderstanding. Mark shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. "You manipulated Dad. You hid assets. Ladies and gentlemen, my sister is a fraud. She took advantage of a dying man." "Did I?" I reached into my clutch and pulled out a flash drive. I walked up to the AV technician at the side of the stage. "Play it." The technician, a young guy who looked terrified, hesitated. "Play it," Mr. Henderson ordered. The massive projection screen behind Mark flickered. A video began to play. It was time-stamped 3 weeks before Dad died. It was Dad, sitting in his favorite armchair in the living room. He looked frail, but his eyes were sharp. "If you're watching this," Dad's voice filled the room, raspy but clear, "it means Mark has tried to take everything. I know my son. I love him, but his greed is a sickness. He has asked me repeatedly to sign the house over to him before I die. He calls it estate planning. I call it theft." Mark froze. Josephine looked like she was going to faint. "Kennedy," Dad continued, looking directly into the camera, "you are the only one who ever cared about the work, not the money. The factory is yours. The cars are yours. I built that collection for you to secure your future because I knew your brother would try to leave you with nothing. Do not let him bully you. Do not let him take what is yours. And Mark." Dad leaned closer to the lens. "If you are watching this, son, I am disappointed, but I am not surprised. You made your choice when you skipped your mother's funeral to close a deal. Goodbye." The video cut to black, silence. Absolute, suffocating silence. Then the murmuring started. It grew into a roar. People were staring at Mark with open disgust. Donors were whispering, shaking their heads. "It's a fake." Josephine shrieked, grabbing the microphone. "It's a deep fake. She made it on a computer." "It was recorded on his iPad," I said calmly, stepping onto the stage. "The metadata is verified, and so is the timeline of your business trip to Cabo during Mom's final days." Mark looked at the crowd. He looked at Mr. Henderson, who was glaring at him with icy contempt. He looked at me. "You ruined me," he whispered, his voice trembling with rage. You witch. No, Mark, I said, leaning into the mic so the whole room could hear. You ruined yourself, you gambled on greed, and you lost. Mr. Henderson stepped up to the podium. Mark, I think it's best if you step down from the board, immediately. Mark stumbled back as if struck. Josephine tried to grab his arm, but he shook her off. He looked at the sea of judging faces, then turned and fled the stage, disappearing through the service exit. Josephine followed him, her heels clacking frantically as she tried to salvage whatever dignity she had left. I stood there, alone on the stage, the projection of Dad's face lingering in my mind. The applause started slowly, Mr. Henderson first, then grew until the whole room was clapping. It wasn't for me. It was for Dad, and for justice. The fallout was swift and brutal. Mark's reputation cratered overnight. The video went viral locally, and his investors pulled out one by one. His real estate firm declared bankruptcy within 3 months. The house, my childhood home, was foreclosed on. Josephine left him before the ink on the bankruptcy papers was dry. I heard she moved to the city, looking for a new opportunity. As for me, I didn't keep all the cars. I sold the Porsche and the Aston Martin at auction for a record-breaking sum. The proceeds paid for the best lawyers money could buy, cleared all the estate taxes, and funded the restoration of the factory. The remaining cars, they stayed. I turned the factory into the Miller Automotive Museum and Restoration Center. It became a haven for classic car enthusiasts, a place where history was preserved, not discarded. Jackson became my head mechanic. Allison took over marketing. One rainy Tuesday, about 6 months later, I was in the office reviewing invoices when there was a knock at the loading bay door. It was Mark. He looked older, tired. He was wearing jeans and a faded polo shirt, not a suit. He was driving a 10-year-old sedan that looked a lot like my old one. Kennedy, he said, standing in the rain. Mark, I said, not inviting him in. I heard about the opening, he said, looking past me at the gleaming showroom floor. It looks good. Dad would have liked it. He would have, I agreed. He shifted his weight. Look, I know I messed up. I was under a lot of pressure. Josephine, she pushed me. Don't blame her, Mark, I said softly. You made your choices, you held the keys. He looked down at his shoes. I lost everything, Ken. The house, the business, my wife. I'm living in a studio apartment on the south side. I know, I said. I bought the house back from the bank last week. His head snapped up. What? I bought it, I said. It's going to be a guest house for visiting restorers, and I'm keeping Mom's garden exactly the way she left it. Tears welled in his eyes. For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the brother I used to know, the one who taught me to ride a bike. He swallowed hard. Can I see it, just once? I looked at him. I saw the regret, the humiliation, but I also saw the entitlement still lurking there, waiting for an opening. No, I said firmly, not yet. Maybe someday, Mark, but not today. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a single key. It wasn't for the house, it was a simple brass key. This is for the storage unit in town, I said, handing it to him. I put some of your things in there, Dad's old tools, some photos, things that actually matter. He took the key, his hand shaking. Thank you, he whispered. Goodbye, Mark, I said. I closed the heavy steel door. I didn't lock it this time. I didn't need to. I turned back to the museum, to the legacy Dad had built, and to the future I was building for myself. The storm outside was over, and inside everything was finally perfectly still.